Hey everybody, Deathblade here. Okay, so Madam Deathblade watched the last couple of videos that I did and she was like cursing me to death, saying that I like had bad posture, and she was like you didn't look happy at all, you look like you were depressed. And she was like cursing me and stuff. So this time I'm trying to, have good posture and like be very happy and stuff, and then hopefully she won't curse me. I'm going to talk in this video about some concepts from Chinese fantasy novels and just the Chinese language in general. Some characters that I tend to translate as immortal, god, demon, devil, and ghost. And I'm going to get into why I translate those specific characters that way, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what they mean in Chinese, how they can be used. In my first big major project, which is called I Shall Seal the Heavens, this concept is actually a major part of the story. First of all, I would like to request for people to not put spoilers into the comments of this video about that, because I think maybe some people might end up watching this video that haven't read the story yet, so I wouldn't want to spoil the story for them. And I'm not going to get into any spoilers about I Shall Seal the Heavens and how the immortal god, demon, devil, ghosting works in there in terms of the storyline. When I started translating I Shall Seal the Heavens, and that was my first major project, and I was very inexperienced at that beginning time, and I wasn't very, what's the right word? I wasn't very conscientious about translating these characters in one specific way every single time. You'll see why that is as I go through this video and explain what the characters mean and how they can be used, because a lot of them are very, very synonymous. And so early on in I Shall Seal the Heavens, I kind of would like randomly choose whether to translate this one particular character as devil or ghost or demon. And then later on, it wasn't until later on that I realized that the difference between these different characters, the Chinese characters, is actually very important. And so toward the end of I Shall Seal the Heavens, I was a lot more conscientious about translating it in one specific way every single time. And nowadays, in my current translation, I do the same thing. I try to maintain consistency between how I translate it. What you'll find, and you'll understand more as I get into the video, what you'll find is that a lot of times the translations are very random, or it's maybe not random, but it's up to the whim of the translator how to translate some of these Chinese characters. And so therefore, if you are reading an English translation of something, sometimes you might not necessarily know which Chinese character is being translated into, for example, devil or demon. The characters that I translate as devil and demon are two different characters, Chinese characters, but sometimes some translators might take the one character and translate it the other way, or vice versa. It's really hard to tell. So enough rambling, let's get into it. And so basically, when you're talking about these 5 different Chinese characters, which represent entities or beings within Chinese mythology or fantasy, in terms of these 5 specific ones, and these aren't the only ones, but in terms of these 5 specific ones, I would generally categorize 2 of them as being sort of like good type creatures or beings, and then the other 3 as generally being bad or like evil. So obviously the 2 good ones are immortal and god, and then the sort of bad ones or evil ones are the devil, demon, and ghost. So I'm going to start with the first 2, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you some screenshots from this app that I use, which is called Pleco, and it's a really great app for Chinese dictionaries. I have something like 20 dictionaries on this app, and I use it a lot to look up the definitions of words. And again, and instantly, I'm going to be talking about these characters, Chinese characters, more in terms of the definition of the characters and how to translate them, as opposed to getting into how they are commonly portrayed in media or in Chinese mythology or history. I think that's a subject for a different video. You'll see what I mean. I have the feeling this video is going to go for maybe 20 minutes or so. I don't know. It's hard to say. And if I got into like the history of how these characters are portrayed, then that would take way, way longer. So we're going to start with the immortal, and I'm going to pull up my dictionary here. Give me 1 second. Okay, so here you can see the dictionary entry, and this is the character Xian, which I translate as immortal. And as you can see right off the bat from the definitions that are on the screen, celestial being or immortal. Again, now this immortal is not necessarily a person who cannot die, although that does tend to kind of come along with it. Usually the characters who are the immortals in mythology or fantasy stories tend to live for a very long time or forever, and they're difficult to kill, but they're not impossible to kill. Going further down through the definitions, you see Taoist super being, transcendent, And then here's another one, fairy. This is one that I see a lot, especially when it's referring to the female immortals. I personally don't like using fairy because to me, I think to most average Westerners, it conjures the image of like Tinkerbell or something, little wings flying around here and there. That's definitely not what these kind of immortals are. Going a little bit further down, you can see that you can add this character to other nouns to create new sort of words, like the Jiu Xian is a great drinker, or the Shi Xian is an immortal poet or a really great poet. A little bit further down, this is my Buddhist dictionary. It has a lot of really great stuff relating to Chinese fantasy novels. And one of the things it mentions is the Ba Xian, the 8 immortals. I'm sure almost anybody who is at least a little bit familiar with Chinese culture has at least heard of these or seen paintings of them. I mean, you go to Chinese restaurants, you'll see paintings of them on the wall, very famous. And that's one of the reasons why I originally went with Immortal as the translation for this, because the 8 immortals I think are pretty well known. You might also notice there's the word Deva in there. And for anybody who's following my current translation, A Will, Eternal, I have characters that are Devas, but they're a little bit different than, it doesn't use the character Xian, which is immortal, so it's a little bit of a complicated subject there. Notice down here sort of how it talks about, it says a classification of 5 is the Xian, the Tian Xian, Shen Xian, Ren Xian, Di Xian, and Gui Xian, and they're translating it as genie. That's not very common from what I've seen, but what is interesting is that you'll notice how you can combine this character Xian with other characters to make new words, and sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, the character Xian will be combined with the characters for the other things I'm going to talk about later. The god, devil, demon, and ghost. For example, here's the character for ghost and the character for immortal, ghost immortal, which is translating as ghost genie. So the fact that they can be combined to make new words or different kinds of people is another kind of twist that makes this entire subject a little bit more complicated. Let's go down through a little bit more of these definitions. Here's a good definition. It says, transcendent being, one who has moved beyond the needs and limits of the mundane world and into the realm of spiritualization or divinity. Perfected, realized persons. This Zhenren is a word that comes up sometimes in the Chinese fantasy novels that translators will translate in a lot of different ways. They could translate Zhenren as Taoist or as a sage or a saint, or who knows. There's a lot of different versions. And as we continue to scroll down through the rest of the definitions, you can see that there are definitely a lot of different ways that this character can be used, but generally speaking, it's going to be an immortal or some kind of transcendent or extremely powerful person. Okay, so that's the immortal. Let's go on to the next one. Here we have the character Shen, which means, as you can see here on the screen, the very first one is a god, which is why I translated it that way, but also deity or divinity. It can also mean spirit, soul, mind. It can mean the expression or the look in your eye. It can mean energy. It can have basically a supernatural or magical meaning. This is a character that has a lot of uses and a lot of definitions. I'm going to slowly scroll through this entry because there's a lot of stuff here. So here is where we get into what I was talking about earlier. As you can see, this definition has God, deity, divinity, and then immortal. So a lot of times these characters get mixed together, especially this character Shen and the character Xian can frequently get used together to mean immortals, like the Xian character by itself. There are a lot of definitions. They're all essentially talking about a similar kind of thing where you're talking about some kind of divine or powerful being. In the Buddhist dictionary, here we again have the same word Deva, which I talked about before, and the same other words that we've talked about frequently in the past as well. One thing that is kind of confusing is that this character Shen is often translated to mean spirit, but there's another character in Chinese that is also translated as spirit, and so getting the difference between those two can be tricky, and that's one of the reasons why when this character is used to refer to some kind of being or person, I almost always use God with, sometimes I'll use divinity to kind of mix things up if it's not important to differentiate between the two. This character is also used a lot in different kinds of like medical things and stuff, and So based on the sheer sort of like number of definitions in here, I'm just going to scroll down here sort of slowly to kind of go all the way through them. They all mostly say the same kind of thing, as you can see. Yeah, it's kind of complicated. Anyway, so those are the first two of the good ones. And I think they're pretty straightforward. Let's now move on to the quote unquote bad ones. So let's start with one of the more complicated ones, which is Gui, which is ghost. Now, let's just scroll through some of the definitions. As you can see, we have ghost and spirit. So again, do you kind of get what I'm talking about in terms of how the definitions and the translations of these words mix and match and they overlap with each other? So in this case, Gui can be ghost, it can be spirit. And as we go down further on, look at there's devilishly, and I'm pretty sure if we go down further, yeah, here we go. So we have demon in here, spirit of the dead, we have devil. So again, this is one of the things I'm talking about where this character will oftentimes be translated as demon or as devil. And the thing about the way it's used in the Chinese fantasy novels that I translate is that it sometimes does mean, or no, it almost always is referring to the spirit of a dead person, their soul or their spirit or something like that. But the way that they're depicted is usually not like, Casper the Ghost kind of thing with a white sheet or like a floating, spectral being. It usually is more like some kind of monster with horns and with fangs and with claws. And if I was gonna go back, I would consider possibly translating this as monster, because sometimes when it's a ghost, and then it'll say, like the text will say something like he looked like a ghost with horns and fangs. To some Western readers, I think that's sort of like odd, because usually ghosts in Western stuff is depicted as a spectral being. So that's ghost. And let's now move on to, how about we do devil now? So this character is Mo, and this is actually the one, when you combine it with Gui, which is ghost, Mo Gui, is actually the more common word for devil in the Western sense. And here we go again, as we get into it, the very first definitions, as you can see, mix together some of the translations of the other characters. We have evil spirit, demon, devil, monster. It tends to have a more magical feeling, I think, because you can combine this character with other characters, like, for example, Mo Li, Mo Shu, to mean magic itself. There obviously are, Buddhist, mythological Buddhist connections as well. But basically, this is some kind of evil or malevolent spirit or ghost. When you see these words all having basically the same definitions in English in the dictionaries, you can see why, as an inexperienced translator, it might be tempting to sort of just like mix and match and pick whichever one you think sounds cool in the moment. But considering that they are supposed to be unique entities within the stories, I feel that it's important to kind of pick one definition and go with it. I know that there's some people who translate this character Moi as fiend, so that's another good one. I personally feel devil is fine. I mean, I, on a very rare occasion, have used fiend instead of devil in the situation where there's some kind of entity that is unique from the standard devil character that's in the stories. Finally, let's go over to the one that I think is probably the most interesting, especially to fans of I Shall Seal the Heavens, and that is demon. So yet again, we have very similar definitions to the other ones. We have goblin, demon, evil spirit, something supernatural, something evil. Going down here, we have devil. So basically, the Chinese characters that I translate as ghost, demon, and devil, respectively, all can be translated in different ways and in the same way. So I picked these and I stuck with them, and I think it makes sense. Essentially, these demons are the ones that you associate with the sort of like demonic creatures in the stories, the truly like mischievous and evil ones, uncanny and unnatural, definitely describe these type of creatures. Okay, so I hope that looking at all of those dictionary definitions has on the one hand helped you to understand the Chinese characters a little bit better, but on the other hand realize that they can all sort of be translated different ways depending on the whim of the translator and the context of the Chinese and the meaning of the Chinese. For me personally, and in the novels that I translate by Argon, and I think a lot of other Chinese fantasy novels, those specific Chinese characters refer to slightly different kinds of entities or beings, and so I think the best thing to do for translators would be to pick one and consistently use that, especially within the framework of one story or one like overarching universe. I think it's a mistake to sort of mix and match. For example, if you're going to have the character Yao be demon, I think it would be a mistake to translate the character Mo as demon as well. And if you're going to translate the character Gui as devil, well then how are you going to translate the character Mo? Maybe fiend? Doesn't really matter necessarily as long as you set it up correctly and then stick with it. Usually the novels will have an explanation of what these creatures look like and how they behave. And so you can rely on the author of the story to sort of provide the information about what that stuff is. In terms of how they are portrayed in art or in the movies or in, history and mythology, I think that's the subject for another video. Sadly, it's not possible, in my opinion, for the average person who does not speak or read Chinese, you cannot watch movies and, or for example, read comic books or look at art and understand the difference between how the Chinese characters are used, because again, they will be translated in different ways by different translators. In some TV show, there might be a Yao who is called a monster. And then in some other Chinese TV show, there may be a Mo that's also a monster, or Gui that's also a monster. Or they might translate Mo as demon and then translate Yao as monster. Or they might translate Yao as demon and Mo as monster. It really, there's no way to tell in English, and there's no like grand law governing translations to where all the translators are going to use the terms in the same way. If it's very important to you, you can always find a Chinese friend to look at the subtitles of the movie or the text in the comic book or whatever it is that you're looking at to get some additional information. I will try to put the topic of what they look like and how they behave and stuff into another video in the future. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this kind of content, you can always support me on Patreon. And I do have more questions that I want to answer. If you have any that you're wondering about, please feel free to leave them in the comments. If you have any insights about the whole immortal, God, demon, devil, ghost, not in the context of the I Shall Seal the Heavens story or universe, but just the Chinese characters on their own, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I love to see that kind of stuff. And that's it for this time. God's love.